Our next speaker is Doug Davis. Doug is also from Georgia. He's from Atlanta. He worked for years at IBM. Before retiring, he also served in the U.S. Navy. Thank you. He and his wife, Carol, live in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and they have 3 children who live in France, Panama, and California. He's active in his church, and his interests include family, military history, personal investing, and sitting on the beach. So, thank you so much for joining us, Doug.
Thank you, Susan. I met my wife at Georgia Tech. I went academically and she went socially. And after graduating from Georgia Tech, I went in the Navy and I drove a wooden ship. The United States Navy had wooden ships. I'm an old guy, but the ships were minesweepers. And they were slow, but real fun. And after the United States Navy, I came back and went to graduate school, received an MBA, and after that, I started interviewing. At the time I was interviewing, the bloom was on the MBAs, and I received a number of job offers. And I accepted a job with the IBM Corporation, who had a need for programmers in Huntsville, Alabama. This was the part of IBM that was supporting NASA. And the program that I was working was the Saturn program, the program that put a man on the moon. One day, when I was at IBM in Huntsville, they told all of us to come outside, and there was about 2,500 people at that facility. And we were standing around a podium, and they brought 3 astronauts out. And after the introductions, the command pilot came to the mic and said, "Thank you, IBM. You saved our lives." And the story went like this. It was Apollo 12. They were running behind schedule, and there was a big cloud cover. And NASA didn't want to, they wanted to keep the schedule, but they couldn't go up through the clouds. And so they waited for a couple of days, and then most of the clouds parted. And so they went on with the mission, and they launched this Saturn V rocket through the clouds that were remaining. The rocket was struck by lightning a number of times, and the command pilot said, "Our entire control panel went blank, and a couple of our rockets stopped functioning. And we knew our ass was grass," which is Air Force terminology that you know what it means. And then he said, "Did I say all of the things on the control panel were blank?" No, there was one little light that was still blinking down in the lower left-hand corner. It was your computer, IBM. We were able to enter a command, repopulate all of the controls, restart those engines that stopped. Thank you, IBM, for the quality of your work that saved our lives. Now, this structure that IBM was making is called an instrument unit, and you can go over and see one at the Air and Space Museum at Dulles, hanging next to the shuttle. Most of the ring has computers and data processing equipment. Branching off to one of my other interests, is military history. My father served in the Army and was called, he's a physician, and he was called to organize and develop a field hospital, which he did. And just before they were scheduled to move to the Philippines with Douglas MacArthur, his first sergeant came to him and said, "Major, as commander, you're able to carry 2 footlockers for your personal gear. I'm asking that you put all your personal gear in one of those footlockers and fill the other one up with bottles of liquor, because they're going to become very handy." My father looked at this sergeant and saw wisdom, and he agreed to do that. Well, they were deployed, and they were very close to the front lines where the hospital was being set up, and they looked at the ground, and it was rough, and they couldn't lay out their surgical tents and their medical tents so that they could do what they needed to do. And the first sergeant looked over and said, "Major, there's a bunch of Seabees over here with bulldozers that are laying out an airfield. Let me have one of those bottles of liquor." So he did, and the sergeant went over and talked to the sailors on the bulldozers. "Could you come help us out?" "Absolutely, Sergeant. No problem." And so the ground got laid out, and the tents were put out, and they went to work. And he was very close to the front lines. And there were bullets coming in through the surgical tent from time to time, but it wasn't always medical activity serving the Army, because there were lulls in the battle. And when there were lulls in the battle, my father would send the surgeons, and he would send the nurses to go to the various villages around to serve, to see what medical needs they had, and which they did. And after a little while, one of the mayors of one of those villages came back to him and through an interpreter said, "I want you to come to my village." And so my dad did, and he went to the village. And in the village, they were digging a hole, and they were digging up a long black Chrysler limousine that they had buried to keep from the Japanese. And so they brought it out. The mechanics got it running, and my dad, a major, was being chauffeured around in this long limousine while generals were bouncing along in jeeps. A little while later, they brought a wounded Japanese officer in front of my dad. And this officer apparently had heard that the Americans are really going to torture prisoners. And so he pointed to my dad's .45 on his hip and pointed to his own head. And what my dad did was he told the soldiers, take him back to surgery and tend his wounds. And the soldiers gave my dad this officer's samurai sword, which I have at home. Now, I have more stories, but I see that my time is up. Maybe I will come back sometime. Thank you, guys.